Cult of the Lamb is a sinister, tricksy little thing. On its face, it's a cute hack and slash beat 'em up, putting you in the shoes of the titular lamb as they slice and dice in the glorious name of the clearly a baddie god that saved them from the executioner's axe. Spend a little more time with it though, and you'll realise that it's one of the best balances of satisfying combat and accessible management sim you can play right now. The world of Lamb isn't one that gets a lot of explaining. You are but the latest in a series of radicalized woodland creatures that a sinister, seemingly omnipotent entity, the One Who Waits, has sent against the four bishops of the old faith. There's a kind of frantic single-mindedness to the fashion that our religiously obsessive little Ovis takes to their mission, and the balanced Cult of the Lamb manages to strike between cutesy woodland frolicking and the feeling that something terrible is happening, drenches Cult of the Lamb in a wonderfully black sense of humour from the get-go. It's hard to find a starting point from which we can dive into the mechanical and systemic cornerstones of Cult of the Lamb. I could spend ages talking about one suite of entirely cohesive, self-supporting mechanics, such as the game's follower system, and you'd still be leaving out large swathes of the game. They're not all created equally. For instance, the sheer breadth of options available to you in the cult building side of the game compared to the game's combat makes the latter pale by comparison, but it doesn't leave Cult of the Lamb feeling uneven, simply that the developers knew exactly how each part fits together, both in the name of efficiency and accessibility. A lot has been made of Cult of the Lamb basically being two games in one, but don't let that convince you that it isn't an expert combination of multiple genres, tones, and goals, managing to morph between its different modes with the slipperiness of a charismatic preacher making up their new world religion on the fly. The overriding simplicity to Lamb's combat could be read as both a strength and a weakness. From the first bloodied bishop left annihilated on their chamber floor to the last boss encounter of the game, Lamb's combat feel is up with the best of the hack and slash genre, and it borrows its fundamentals of that same cream of the crop. Before chopping your way through the randomly generated maps which make up the four primary dungeons, you'll be given a random selection of one weapon and one curse attack. You can also find other weapons and spells while on runs or crusades that vary in base damage, attack speed, and elemental damage. There's also tarot cards, temporary buffs which can boost your attack speed, health bar, or even how effective attacks are during day or night. This may sound like a lot, but you'll quickly build up the speed to blow through these moments of choice, tuning your little lamb into a ping-ponging merino ball of death. This efficiency can also read as flatness, and as much as Lamb tries to vary things up with new enemy types and a whole host of curse attacks, the repetition of the game's combat becomes clearer as you carve your way to the finish line. The cult side of Cult of the Lamb very much informs the combat side rather than the other way around. Something to be aware of if you're just here for a bit of beat 'em up blood and guts, and if it weren't for the unity of the game's two halves with all the systems that knit them together, Lamb would be a far weaker game. However, it's the standout success of Lamb as a simulator that raises up everything around it. The cult in Cult of the Lamb is the burning pyre around which the rest of the game dances, and its rhythms are easy to get lost in. You'd think the star would be the Lamb themselves, but the spotlight really belongs to your faithful acolytes and the cult you build around them. The cult community that you establish in Cult of the Lamb is by and large comprised of refugees and survivors from the dark-fanged forests that you crusade through during combat sections. After transporting them back to your cult site, you'll be able to indoctrinate them and put them to work praising your name, providing you with devotion, the primary upgrade resource, collecting resources, or even venturing out on little gathering adventures of their own. Cultists come in all shapes, species, and colours, with a whole host of personalities represented as buffs and debuffs, which affect everything from their risk of illness to their gullibility, which, while largely inconsequential for a singular cultist, start to play out in really interesting ways as your worship hall swells in greater and greater numbers. In one instance, I had one of my most loyal and high-ranking followers become disillusioned with me after bearing witness to one too many dark culty doings, eventually turning on me, preaching against my cult's teachings and convincing others to do the same. In the end, we couldn't reconcile our differences and old mate ended up bailing. Hey, there's nothing in my cult's handbook that says you can't just dip. Wreaking havoc on your followers' well-being is one of Cult of the Lamb's most troublingly satisfying and hilarious mechanics. You can kill them, eat them, marry them, even force them to go on a hunger strike, a personal favourite of mine. They get old too, swapping out their blood-red robes for old people PJs and a walking stick, and depending on how your cult views old age, you might be better off sacrificing them to some tentacled beast than letting them slip off silently in their sleep. I've done my best to touch on everything Cult of the Lamb has to offer, but honestly, I still feel like I'm only scratching the surface. I haven't talked about the multiple locations, the random characters you meet during your crusades, the voice acting, the mini games, the mini bosses, the art and the music. Honestly, this is one of the best looking and sounding roguelikes I've played in yonks. In the early access info sent out when I first got my hands on Cult of the Lamb, it was described as having anywhere between 12 to 24 hours of gameplay, which tells you just how much room for expression there is in Cult of the Lamb. For a no-name little game from Melbourne that really grabbed the hearts of gaming audiences ever since its debut, it's a pleasure to say Cult of the Lamb is an incredible success in almost everything it puts its mind to, and I couldn't be happier to be part of its flock. Play.